Imagine you're tuning in to a captivating entertainment report that whisks you away on a musical journey through American rock history, filled with triumph, heartbreak, resilience, and a man's relentless devotion to his craft. Today, we're spotlighting the life of Bob Seger, a revered singer-songwriter whose distinctive sound once rattled garages in Michigan before reverberating across the nation's arenas. Prepare yourself for a deep dive into the spirit of an artist who poured his soul into every performance, then had to cope with personal turmoil and an industry that never stopped moving. So sit back, get comfortable, and let's jump right into the story. Born as Robert Clark Seger on May 6, 1945 in Michigan, he entered the world during a time when rock and roll was still forging its identity. The era favored pioneers. Elvis was already shaking his hips. Little Richard was belting out fast-paced rock anthems. And in young Bob's household, music was more than a hobby. It was a bonding force. His father, Stuart Seger, worked as a medical technician but had a burning passion for music, often picking up whatever instrument was at hand for impromptu jam sessions. Those moments planted the seeds of devotion that would sprout in Bob's later life. However, not all was harmonious in the Seger home. Stuart and his wife, Charlotte, weathered intense marital problems. Storms brewed behind the scenes, and the tension gradually put more than a crack in their relationship. By the time Bob was 10, his father packed up and left, leaving Charlotte and her children to navigate life's difficulties without him. When he was still a teen, Bob's fascination with the rough-hewn side of rock and roll sharpened. With inspirations like Elvis and Little Richard in his ears, he leaned toward a gritty sound filled with up-tempo beats, howling vocals, and a distinctly American passion that drew from R&B, soul, and eventually garage rock. By 1961, he was diving headfirst into performance. He fronted a Detroit-based trio called the Decibels, and fate took an interesting turn when he crossed paths with Eddie Punch Andrews, soon to be his manager and bandmate. Like so many starry-eyed dreamers in the 60s, Seger found a way to stay busy making local noise in a variety of small ensembles. One of those was the Town Criers, before he shifted gears and became the keyboardist and vocalist for Doug Brown and the Omens. That sense of fearless experimentation led to comedic, rebellious stunts, like when the band billed themselves as the Beach Bums and recorded a parody track, The Ballad of the Yellow Beret, mocking Barry Sadler's The Ballad of the Green Beret. Eventually threatened by a lawsuit, they had to withdraw it from circulation, but the entire incident was a preview of Bob's rock and roll mentality, pushing boundaries, living on the edge, unafraid of controversy. By 1966, Bob had stepped into the solo world, releasing the single East Side Story, which found regional success. It wasn't a national smash, but it proved something essential. His presence could catch people's attention, at least within the Michigan music scene. Soon he signed with Cameo Records, pursuing that tenuous path to a bigger stage, and unleashed tracks like Persecution Smith and Heavy Music. Although the label shut down in 1968, Bob's ambition burned on. In the late 60s, he formed a band under his own banner, the Bob Seger System, and sealed a deal with Capitol Records. Their debut album, Ramblin' Gamblin' Man, came out in 1969, with the riveting title track climbing the charts to number 17th. He Group's subsequent release, Noah, didn't replicate that traction, and Bob, facing the industry's ruthless realities, briefly withdrew to attend college. 1 year later, music lured him back, and he returned with the album Mongrel at the tail end of 1970. In 1971, Bob recorded Brand New Morning, a pivot from hard-driving rock to a more introspective singer-songwriter vibe. He decided to disband the group and stand more or less on his own for that record, Around that time, he also began collaborating with Dave Teagarden and Skip Van Winkle Nape, working on Smokin' OPs in 1972. It was the first album under his new imprint, Palladium Records, co-founded with manager Punch Andrews. Although that release didn't catapult him into stardom, it underscored his capacity for reinvention. There was grit and resilience in those early to mid-70s years, marked by a string of attempts that didn't always translate into massive commercial success. By the mid-70s, he signed back with Capitol and released Beautiful Loser in 1975. This time, he wasn't alone. He formed the Silver Bullet Band, featuring Drew Abbott on guitar, Chris Campbell on bass, Robin Robbins on keyboards, Alto Reed on saxophone, and Charlie Allen Martin on drums. Beautiful Loser became the foundation for a new era, though it didn't immediately skyrocket on the charts. However, the extensive touring that followed built an undeniable groundswell of support. Enthusiastic fans across the country were responding to the combination of Bob's soulful American-rooted rock and the Silver Bullet Band's tight, energetic performance style. This synergy truly erupted in 1976, when Live Bullet, recorded in Detroit, found its way into the public ear and simply would not let go. The album lingered on the charts for over 3 years and eventually went quadruple platinum. It was a watershed moment. With Live Bullet, Seger transcended the local hero status and began cementing his reputation as a powerhouse performer who could deliver unforgettable live shows. Fans were drawn to his authenticity. The rawness of his voice and the unpolished yet razor-sharp band arrangements made them feel like they were in the front row, whether listening to a recording or seeing him in person. Riding on that wave, Bob released Night Moves in 1976. It arrived at the perfect time, right as the success of Live Bullet was shining a spotlight on him in a way that no previous project had. Night Moves soared into the top 10 in early 1977 and became an outright blockbuster. Its title track was an immediate classic, an ode to youthful romance and the passage of time. Main Street and Rock and Roll Never Forgets further showcased Seger's uncanny ability to speak to everyday experiences in a soulful, melodic way. He balanced introspection and boisterous rock like few others could, and audiences heard their own stories echoed in his ballads and anthems. The momentum continued with Stranger in Town in 1978, unleashing iconic tracks such as Still the Same, Hollywood Nights, We've Got Tonight, and old-time rock and roll. At that point, he was more than just a chart topper. He was an American rock mainstay, a gritty yet heartfelt voice that felt both timeless and immediate. The end of the 70s and dawn of the 80s brought another milestone, 1980's Against the Wind, which became Bob's first #1 album. It had radio-friendly hits like Fire Lake, You'll Accompany Me, and the title track, all with a mellower vibe than some earlier, in-your-face bangers. This slight pivot showcased his evolution, an artist comfortable moving between fist-pumping rock and introspective slow burners, all with that distinctive Seger DNA. The subsequent live album, Nine Tonight, also ascended the charts, hitting triple platinum, proving that the appetite for Bob's signature live energy showed no signs of waning. Though the Silver Bullet Band was firmly associated with him, behind-the-scenes lineups started to shift. Some members who had poured heart and soul into building the band parted ways, disillusioned or simply moving on. In 1982 came The Distance, an album that delivered Shame on the Moon, which soared higher on the singles chart than perhaps anyone anticipated. Yet the album as a whole didn't reach the multi-platinum peaks of his earlier blockbusters. As the 80s progressed, Bob started to slow his once constant output. Recording and touring took a back seat as he became more selective about his projects. When he did put out an album, such as 1986's Like a Rock, it still made waves among his devoted fan base. And in a stroke of timely success, the track Shakedown off the Beverly Hills Cop 2 soundtrack managed to land at number 1 on the charts in 1987, giving him one of his biggest pop triumphs. Yet the writing was on the wall. He was no longer the unstoppable chart presence he'd been in the late 70s and early 80s. Tastes were shifting, and so was he. By the early 90s, Bob took long pauses, seemingly reevaluating what he wanted from his career and from life in general. 1991's The Fire Inside made it to the top 10, and 1995's It's a Mystery still resonated with loyal supporters, but it sold less than previous efforts. He had to face the question that all enduring rock icons eventually grapple with. How does one remain true to that original spark while adapting to new musical landscapes and personal evolutions? For a man who drew so much of his energy from hometown roots and sincere storytelling, maybe the formula was simply to remain authentic to that identity rather than chase new trends. Nevertheless, he found it prudent to take an extended break, surfacing now and again for guest appearances, but mostly staying close to family in Michigan. It's not that Bob vanished. It was more like he receded, returning to the shadows when not actively working on new material. Meanwhile, the accolades continued to roll in. In 2004, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, an affirmation of his enduring impact on American popular music. In 2006, after a hiatus of 11 years, he surprised fans with Face the Promise, opting not to release it as a Silver Bullet Band project. This was a personal statement, proof that Bob was still his own man, unafraid to break from established formulas in pursuit of something fresh. Though it didn't spawn any huge crossover hits, the single Wait for Me broke into the adult contemporary top 20, a testament to his continued relevance. The album debuted at number 1, 4 on the Billboard 200, and eventually went platinum, reminding everyone that despite the shift in musical trends toward hip-hop, pop, and electronic-infused rock, there was still room for a classic Heartland rocker whose trademark was sincerity. Over the following years, Seger combed through his archives, releasing a 2009 compilation, Early Seger, Volume 1, that mixed older cuts with newly recorded versions, and a 2011 hits collection, Ultimate Hits Rock and Roll Never Forgets, which went platinum yet again. In that era, he even took a moment to interpret Tom Waits's Downtown Train, proving he still had an ear for reimagining songs in his own style. October 2014 ushered in Ride Out, and once again Bob launched onto the Billboard chart, landing at number 1. 3. A remarkable achievement for someone who'd been making music for more than 50 years. 3 years later, in 2017, he offered I Knew You When, which was dedicated to his longtime friend, the recently departed Glenn Frey of the Eagles. It was a poignant reflection on both the inevitability of loss and the power of enduring friendships. As he inched deeper into his 70s, Bob's health understandably became a more pressing concern, and he appeared less frequently in public. Live performances grew rarer, and news about him was sporadic, fueling speculation among fans about whether he'd eventually return for one more big moment in the spotlight. Alongside the roller coaster of his career, Bob's personal life played out in equally dramatic fashion. His first marriage to Renee Andretti in 1968 lasted just shy of 1 year. Nearly 2 decades later, in 1987, he tied the knot with actress Annette Sinclair, but that relationship also dissolved after about a year. His third marriage came in 1993 when he wed Juanita Doricott. The two welcomed 2 children, And by all accounts, that union offered Bob a measure of stability he'd not found in previous relationships. Earlier, he'd been in a long-term partnership with Jan Dinsdale from 1972 to 1983. Over a decade of shared experiences that ended without the lifelong commitment either might have initially envisioned. If you listen closely to his work, you might pick up the echoes of heartbreak and longing that pepper many of his songs. A reminder that music, for Bob, was a reflection of real heartbreaks, real joys, and a search for meaning that went beyond stardom. Yet, even in the face of those deeply personal ups and downs, Bob never completely lost his moral or creative footing. For every heartbreak, he poured raw emotion into another track. For every missed commercial opportunity, he found solace in connecting with fans who treated him not just as a rock star, but as a neighbor from their hometown. His music resonates because it's lived in, shaped by actual adversity, heartbreak, fleeting triumphs, and renewed determination. That sense of realness, of emotional honesty, can be hard to find in an industry that so often prioritizes flash over substance. No matter how big the stage he played on, Bob retained the vibe of someone who'd never entirely left the garage in which he first learned to rock out. Now with Bob well into his 80s, fans occasionally wonder what else he has to give. Could there be another album or a final major tour? Should we expect him to retire quietly, to enjoy family and reflect on his storied past? The truth might lie somewhere in between. Like so many veteran artists, he's earned the right to do what feels right to him, whether that's stepping out for a surprise appearance or living quietly. One thing is certain: the music he's recorded remains a testament that time can't erase. Old-time rock and roll, Night Moves, Turn the Page, Against the Wind, these are not just songs. They're cultural cornerstones that appear in films, commercials, cover band sets, and everyday playlists. They evoke memories for multiple generations. Teenagers sneaking out at night, couples finding solace in a slow dance, older fans revisiting a sense of youth they feared was lost. If you've been enthralled by Bob Seger's story and still get chills whenever Night Moves comes on the radio, you're not alone. He's that kind of artist, one who draws us in generation after generation. And though he may not be in top health these days, and though the rumors of a sad ending may circulate, perhaps we should think of his life in terms of testament rather than tragedy. He's given us a legacy of songs that stir nostalgia, that give voice to yearning, that fill our hearts with a sense of real, tangible American life. There's something timeless about that rough-hewn voice, about that unwavering determination to stand by sincere melodies and straightforward lyrics. To anyone who's felt adrift or uncertain, his music says, "This is real. This is life, messy, thrilling, heartbreaking, and worth every second." So let's raise a figurative glass to Bob Seger, a man who started out as a scrappy rocker in Michigan, going toe-to-toe with the region's other garage rockers, forging a dynamic R&B-infused style that evolved into a defining force in Heartland Rock. Over the decades, he refused to buckle under the demands of fleeting industry trends, instead investing his energies in growing, adapting, and staying true to himself. It's the reason his songs still reverberate around bar jukeboxes, car stereos, and concert venues. His story might have sorrowful undertones, but it's also one of unwavering dedication and the quest for personal peace, a quest that mirrors our own. And that note of hard-earned triumph and humility is how we'll draw this entertainment report to a close. We hope you've enjoyed this extended peek behind the curtain, discovering not just the bullet points of Bob Seger's career, but the heart and soul that kept him going when the odds were stacked against him. Keep those speakers cranked. Remember that rock and roll never forgets, and stay on the lookout for our next deep dive into the legends who shape the soundtrack of our lives. After all, stories like Bob's keep us tuned in, enthralled, and ready for the next encore, even if that encore exists only in our memories. Here's hoping you'll stick around for future adventures into the lives and legacies of music's most compelling figures, and that Bob Seger's journey reminds you that sometimes the greatest triumph is simply never losing faith in the power of a good song.